Welcome, wherever you are tonight. Whether you lie beneath blankets, your eyes half closed, or whether you sit quietly, headphones on, letting the weight of the day soften around you. This is your time. A moment carved from the noise. A space where history drifts like a gentle tide. And before we wander together, before your eyes grow heavy, let me ask one small kindness. If these calm journeys bring you peace, if they help you in the long hours of night, remember to like this video and subscribe. It helps us keep these stories alive, like a quiet flame that burns against the dark. Tell me, too, where are you listening from tonight? Are you in your bedroom, the curtains drawn against the city lights? Or perhaps you are traveling. In a hotel bed, strange walls around you, this voice keeping you company. Or maybe you are simply resting in a chair, the hum of a fan steady in the background. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, leave a comment. I love to know where these calm echoes find you. Now, let us begin. You may have seen it on a screen or in photographs. China's great military parade. Rows upon rows of soldiers marching in perfect step. Tanks rolling like steel rivers through the avenues. Missiles lifted high, gleaming in the sun. Every movement rehearsed. Every detail polished. A show of strength, not only for those who watch abroad, but for those who stand within. Power made visible. Every empire has done this. Every great power has marched its soldiers, displayed its weapons, gathered its people to witness the rhythm of might. It is not only a modern invention, it is an ancient instinct. For long before China's parades, before missiles and tanks, there was Assyria, an empire that outmuscled its rivals, that turned warfare into art, into industry, into ritual. Their armies, too, marched in ordered lines. Their kings, too, displayed their weapons, their victories carved in stone. Their power, too, was shown in spectacle. And so tonight, we drift back from the modern echoes of steel and fire into the ancient shadows of clay and stone, to see how Assyria, long ago, paraded its strength, how it stood as the world's first superpower, how it showed its might, long before China, long before us all. The boulevard stretches wide, banners ripple in the wind, and China's great parade begins. Row after row of soldiers march in unison, their boots striking the ground like the steady ticking of a clock. Tanks rumble behind. Missiles glide upon carriers. Overhead, jets roar, trailing ribbons of color across the pale sky. The city itself vibrates with power. But the parade is not only for the people of China. It is for the world. At the viewing stand, the cameras linger. Xi Jinping, steady, composed, watching his armies flow past like a river of steel. And beside him, invited guests. Vladimir Putin, his presence a quiet signal of alliance. Jong, smiling faintly, his train having carried him across borders for this moment. Other leaders, diplomats, generals, all seated, all watching. It is theater, a show of friendship, of defiance, of strength displayed not only in weapons, but in who is invited to see them. The message is clear. This is not one nation alone. This is a stage of allies, a wall of power. An empire reminding the world that it cannot be ignored. Every empire has done this. Rome once paraded its legions, bringing foreign kings in chains to watch. The Soviets rolled their missiles through Red Square, inviting foreign eyes to tremble. And now China, too, gathers its allies, its rivals, its watchers, and says silently, "Look and remember." But the instinct, the ritual, is ancient. Long before she invited Putin and Kim. Long before cameras broadcast parades to every corner of the globe. Assyria understood. The Assyrian kings marched their armies in ordered ranks. Their chariots rattled across dry earth. Their siege engines rolled forward, painted with blood and dust. Their foreign captives paraded in chains, forced to kneel before the throne. Their victories carved in stone, so every visitor to Nineveh or Ashur would see. Power was not only for the battlefield. It was for display. Every empire shows its might. But Assyria was among the first to master the art of showing muscle, not only to its enemies, but to its own people, and to the world beyond. And so tonight, we leave the steel and missiles of Beijing. We drift back, across centuries, across deserts and rivers, to the dawn of Assyria, where power was sharpened like iron, and displayed like theater. The noise of parades fades. The echo of marching boots, the roar of jets, the gleam of missiles in Beijing's sun, all fall away. And in their place, another world begins to rise. Close your eyes and imagine a land long ago. The soil dry, yet rich when watered. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates winding like silver threads across the earth. Their floods shaping valleys, their waters turning desert into grain. And in the heart of this land stood the city of Ashur. It was not yet an empire, not yet the terror of nations. It was a small city-state, little more than walls of mud brick, temples rising modestly to the gods. Merchants walked its streets. Priests tended shrines. Children played in dusty courtyards. But even then, something stirred. For Ashur's position was both blessing and curse. The rivers carried wealth. Caravans from Anatolia in the north, from Babylon in the south, from lands even further beyond. Trade flowed, bringing tin, textiles, timber. The city prospered. But prosperity drew danger. To the west lay tribes who coveted the land. To the east, rival cities, eager for control. To the south, Babylon, older and mightier. Assyria, if it wished to endure, could not remain weak. And so, from the beginning, its people learned the lesson of survival. Strength was not luxury. It was necessity. Without it, their city would fall, their wealth stolen, their people enslaved. The Assyrians looked upon their land and saw the need for order, discipline, and might. They were merchants, yes. They were farmers, yes. But above all, they became soldiers. Every field, every caravan, every temple, protected by the promise of war. Close your eyes again. Imagine the first kings of Assyria, centuries before the great empire. Men who rose not only to rule, but to protect. Their crowns simple, their palaces modest, but their vision clear. If Assyria were to survive, it must become more than a city. It must become a fortress. They built walls higher, thicker. They trained men not as part-time fighters, but as soldiers first. They began to carve their victories into stone, so the world would remember. And in doing so, they planted the seeds of empire. The land shaped them. The rivers gave them food, but also brought invaders along their banks. The plains gave them space to farm, but also space for enemies to march. The mountains to the north and east offered timber and stone, but also tribes eager to raid. Every gift of geography carried danger, and danger demanded strength. So slowly, Ashur grew into more than a city. It became the heart of a people who believed survival itself depended on war. And from Ashur came Nineveh, Nimrud, and other centers of Assyrian might. Each one larger, stronger, more daring than the last. The dawn of Assyria was not sudden. It was a long, slow rising. 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 battles fought and won, until one truth became clear. In a world of shifting powers, Assyria would not bow. It would rise. It would outmuscle its neighbors. It would seize power and hold it with iron hands. And so, from rivers and plains, from merchants and farmers turned into soldiers, the first superpower began to take shape. But it was not only the land, not only necessity, that forged them. It was the creation of something new. A true army. And so, we turn now to the rise of the Assyrian military machine. Iron swords, disciplined ranks, and a vision of war unlike anything the world had seen before. The dawn of Assyria began with rivers and trade. But its survival depended on something more enduring. Not on merchants' caravans. Not on harvests of barley. But on soldiers. Close your eyes. and imagine the sound of footsteps upon dry earth. Not one or two, but hundreds, thousands. The steady rhythm of marching, a heartbeat of empire. The Assyrians were among the first to understand that power could not rely only on part-time fighters, farmers who picked up spears when danger came, shepherds who left their flocks to fight. Such men could defend for a season, but not for an age. Assyria wanted more. It needed more. And so, it built one of the world's first standing armies. Men trained not as farmers first, but as soldiers always. Disciplined, drilled, ordered. Ready not only to defend, but to march outward. To conquer. This was new. Other kingdoms relied on levies, men called up when war came. But Assyria kept its warriors year-round. Fed them, armed them, drilled them. Their lives woven not around the cycle of harvest, but around the cycle of war. Close your eyes again. Picture the glint of iron. While many of their rivals still wielded bronze, the Assyrians mastered ironworking. Stronger, sharper, harder. Their swords bit deeper. Their spearheads held longer. Their armor resisted blows that would shatter bronze. Iron gave them an edge, not only in battle, but in fear. For to face an Assyrian warrior was to face the future, armed against the past. The army was not only strong, it was organized. There were infantry, steady in their ranks. Spearmen with shields locked together, forming walls of defense. Archers, loosing volleys that darkened the sky. Cavalry, fast and fierce, charging with lances. And chariots, rumbling across the plains, their wheels wrapped in bronze, their crews striking swiftly before melting away. Every part of the army had its place. Every man knew his role. Discipline made them more than a mob of fighters. It made them a machine. The kings of Assyria claimed their armies were chosen by the gods. That Ashur, their divine patron, marched with them. But behind the prayers, there was calculation. Logistics, supply chains, organization. Their armies carried food, tools, even engineers who could build roads, bridges, and siege engines as they moved. They did not simply march. They transformed the land as they went. Close your eyes once more. Hear the sound of drums. The horns calling men to order. See the banners raised, painted with lions and winged bulls, symbols of divine might. Watch as ranks of soldiers step forward, iron glinting in the sun, dust rising around them. It is not chaos. It is rhythm. A rhythm of conquest. To their enemies, the Assyrian army was terrifying. They came swiftly. They came in numbers. They came with weapons that did not break. Villages burned before them. Cities fell to their rams and towers. Resistance often seemed hopeless. And yet, Behind the terror, there was brilliance. For the Assyrians had seen what few before them had understood. That strength is not only in numbers, not only in courage. It is in discipline, in organization, in the careful weaving of soldiers into a single force, greater than the sum of its parts. This was the rise of the Assyrian army, a force unlike any the world had seen. A standing, professional, iron-wielding machine of conquest. And it was more than soldiers. It was culture itself. The Assyrians began to see war not as occasional misfortune, but as the very heart of their identity. The Assyrian army was not only a force, it was the very mirror of their society. For in Assyria, war was not occasional, not an interruption of peace. It was life itself. Close your eyes and picture a world where nearly every image of kings, every carving upon palace walls, every tale sung by priests and scribes, was a story of conquest. Assyrian kings were not remembered first for wisdom, nor for mercy. They were remembered for victories, for cities burned, for captives taken, for enemies crushed beneath their chariots. A king without conquest was no king at all. He was expected to expand borders, to march outward, to remind both his people and his enemies that Assyria's strength was unshakable. When a new ruler rose to the throne, one of his first duties was war. To demonstrate his favor with the gods, to prove his right to wear the crown. The inscriptions tell us. Kings carved their victories into stone, lining palace walls with scenes of triumph. Great panels of soldiers marching, enemies kneeling, tribute carried in heaps of silver and gold. To walk through these palaces was to be surrounded by war. Every corridor a reminder that Assyria's might was eternal. And the people believed it. For from childhood, they were taught the stories that the gods themselves favored Assyria, that Ashur, the divine lord, marched with their kings. That war was not simply survival, but destiny. Close your eyes again. Picture a soldier, young, strong, but weary from campaign. He returns home, his tunic torn, his sword dulled. He expects not pity, but honor. For in Assyria, a man's value was measured not by his harvest, but by his victories. Even farmers and craftsmen felt this weight. For though they tilled the soil or shaped the clay, their labor fed the army. Their taxes armed soldiers. Their hands built roads for conquest. Every life tied, directly or indirectly, to the endless march of Assyrian expansion. War became ritual. Every campaign planned with offerings to the gods. Priests blessing weapons, sacrifices made, omens read in the stars. The army marched not only with iron, but with divine sanction. Their conquests written as holy acts, their kings styled as chosen instruments. And because it was ritual, it was also celebrated in spectacle. Victories were paraded through cities. captives led in chains, spoils displayed before the people. These were not only punishments for enemies. They were lessons for Assyrians themselves, to remind them that their kings were mighty, their gods invincible, their empire destined to endure. Close your eyes once more. Imagine walking the streets of Nineveh after a great campaign. The markets filled with exotic goods, spices from distant lands, ivory from far coasts, animals never seen before. The air buzzing with stories of victories. Children playing at soldiers, shouting the names of kings as though they were gods. The rhythm of life itself beating in time with the march of armies. The culture of war was not only in palaces, not only in parades. It was in daily life, in stories told by grandparents, in songs sung at festivals, in the pride carried by families whose sons marched with the king. Assyria was war, and war was Assyria. And as this culture grew, the empire itself hardened, its armies sharper, its people more devoted, its kings more ambitious. War was no longer just for survival. It was for glory, for dominance, for the sheer declaration of being the strongest in the world. Close your eyes again. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of a people who believed war itself was their identity, who believed conquest was the will of heaven, who believed their empire existed to expand without end. This was the culture of war. And from this culture came not only soldiers, but displays of power that stretched beyond battlefields. Parades of might, carved in stone, marched in flesh. Rituals of strength shown to all who dared to watch. Power is never only in the sword. It is in how the sword is shown. For Assyria understood, long before many others, that strength unused could wither. But strength displayed, strength remembered, could grow even greater. Close your eyes and walk with me through the gates of Nineveh. The walls tower above you, their stones carved with winged bulls and lions, guardians of the city. Beyond them, the streets stretch wide, lined with people waiting. Not only citizens, but captives from foreign lands, envoys from neighboring kingdoms, merchants from distant coasts, all eyes fixed on the procession about to pass. At its heart are the soldiers, helmets gleaming, iron swords at their sides, bows slung across their shoulders, their shields polished, their chariots rolling with heavy wheels wrapped in bronze. They march not in chaos, but in ranks, their steps steady, their banners raised high. The images of lions, winged bulls, and gods embroidered upon the cloth. Every movement meant to remind, this is not a rabble. This is an army shaped like stone. Behind them come the captives. Men and women from conquered cities, bound with rope, led through the streets for all to see. Some kneel. Some stumble. Some glare silently at the crowd. They are not paraded for cruelty alone. They are symbols. Reminders of what happens when defiance meets Assyria. Their presence whispers louder than any speech, "Resist, and this will be your fate." Then come the spoils. Carts piled with silver and gold. Chests of ivory and precious stones. Exotic animals led by chains, lions, leopards, monkeys, even elephants. Objects never before seen by the common people. Wonders from lands far away. Each treasure carried not only as wealth, but as spectacle. Proof of how far Assyria's reach extended. And then, the king. He does not walk. He rides in a chariot, its wood carved with images of his own victories. The reins in his hand, the crown upon his head. Priests walk before him, swinging censers of incense, the smoke rising in fragrant clouds. Scribes walk behind, recording every moment on clay tablets. He is not only a man. He is a God's chosen warrior. And the parade makes this visible. Undeniable. Close your eyes again. And imagine the sound. Drums pounding. Horns blaring. The heavy roll of chariots. The cries of captives. The cheers of citizens. The chanting of priests. The air itself alive with rhythm, with ritual, with power on display. But it was not only in parades of flesh and iron. It was in stone. In art. In words carved to last for centuries. Step now into the great palace halls. The walls rise high, covered in long stone reliefs. Scenes stretch in endless panels, soldiers marching, archers loosing arrows, kings raising bows, lions hunted, enemies kneeling. Every inch carved with precision, detail so fine you can see the folds of clothing, the terror in the eyes of captives. These reliefs were not decoration. They were propaganda in stone. Every visitor to the palace, envoy, servant, soldier, walked through corridors of conquest. The message inescapable: Assyria is eternal, its kings are victorious, its enemies are dust. And beyond stone, there were words. Inscriptions chiseled into tablets, written in cuneiform. The king boasting, "I destroyed their city. I carried off their treasures. I chained their people and made them kneel." Such words, repeated over and over, made memory itself a weapon. Even if the battle was forgotten, the record remained. This was display of might. A performance for citizens, for enemies, for gods. Power staged like theater, as carefully orchestrated as any modern parade. Close your eyes once more. Think of the tanks rolling in Beijing. The missiles gleaming in the sun. The jets trailing smoke above. And then think of the chariots of Nineveh. The captives led through the streets. The treasures piled high. Two worlds, thousands of years apart. And yet, the rhythm is the same. Power must be seen. To be believed. To be feared. The Assyrians mastered this truth. And in mastering it, they became more than warriors. They became actors upon the stage of empire. Every victory a story. Every story a weapon. And from these displays of might came the tools that made them feared above all. Their siegecraft, their mastery of breaking cities, stone by stone, wall by wall. The parades showed power. The carvings declared it. But on the battlefield, in front of city walls, Assyria proved it. For while other kingdoms fought with courage, with spirit, with numbers, the Assyrians fought with method, with craft, with a cold, calculated mastery of siege. Close your eyes and picture the ancient world. Cities rose high on mounds of earth, their walls thick, of mud, brick or stone. Gates reinforced with heavy beams, towers standing tall at corners. Within those walls lay the heart of kingdoms. Their temples, their palaces, their treasures, their people. Most armies, when faced with such walls, faltered. They camped outside, waiting, hoping famine or thirst would break the defenders. But the Assyrians did not wait. They broke walls. They brought with them machines unlike anything the world had seen. Battering rams. Great beams of timber, their heads capped in bronze or iron. Mounted on wheeled frames, covered with hides soaked in water so they would not burn. Rolled to the gates, driven forward with relentless force. Boom. 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 Each strike shaking the earth, each blow tearing at the defenses. Siege towers. Massive wooden frames, taller than the walls themselves. Pushed forward by sweating soldiers, their sides covered to shield against arrows. At their tops, archers crouched, loosing volleys down into the city. From their platforms, bridges dropped, soldiers rushing across to storm the battlements. Ladders. Carried swiftly by infantry. Raised against walls. Climbers swarming upward, shields strapped to their backs, swords in hand. The defenders above pushing, striking, pouring boiling liquids. But still, the Assyrians climbed. Wave after wave, relentless. And then, the tunnels. Engineers digging silently beneath the walls. Propping the tunnels with timber. Setting them aflame. The supports burned, the earth collapsed, and whole sections of wall crumbled. A breach torn open. Soldiers flooding in like water. Close your eyes again. Imagine standing within a besieged city. You hear the thunder of rams outside the gate. The creak of towers rolling closer, their shadows falling across the walls. The hiss of arrows raining down. The crash of stones hurled from catapults. And beneath your feet, the ground trembles. You know the walls will not hold. The Assyrians perfected not only the tools, but the rhythm of siege. They trained specialists, engineers, builders, sappers, men whose craft was to dismantle defenses. They carried tools of fire and water, buckets, hooks, torches. They planned every stage. Encircle the city, cut off supply lines, launch rams, roll towers, dig tunnels. A choreography of destruction. And to the enemy, it was terrifying. For resistance seemed useless. Where others might camp and starve, the Assyrians advanced and broke. Their engines of war as fearsome as their soldiers. Their skill as terrifying as their strength. They did not only win battles. They ended sieges quickly, brutally, efficiently. And the speed of their victories spread fear across the region. Cities surrendered at the sound of their approach. Nations paid tribute rather than risk the horror of resistance. Close your eyes once more. Picture the reliefs carved in stone within Assyrian palaces. You see soldiers pushing siege towers, archers loosing arrows, men climbing ladders, captives dragged away, walls collapsing. The scenes are so detailed you can see the tears on the faces of prisoners, the flames licking at the gates. These were not only memories. They were messages, telling the world, no wall can stand against us. No city can defy us. This was siegecraft, the art of breaking resistance, the science of conquest. And it made Assyria not just powerful, but unstoppable. Yet conquest was not only fought with machines of war. It was also fought with the mind. For the Assyrians knew another truth. That terror itself was a weapon. The rams thundered. The towers loomed. The arrows darkened the sky. But long before the gates splintered, long before the walls crumbled, the battle was already half won. For the Assyrians understood a truth that few before them had mastered. That fear itself is a weapon. Sharper than a sword. Heavier than a shield. And they wielded it with deliberate precision. Close your eyes. And imagine news traveling through ancient lands. A merchant caravan arriving at a small city. Their faces pale, their voices low. They are coming, they whisper. The Assyrians are coming. Stories spread faster than armies. Tales of sieges where no mercy was shown. Of captives led away in chains. Of kings flayed alive, their skins hung upon walls. The listeners shiver. Not because they have seen it, but because they have heard it. And the imagination, fed by terror, is a greater army than any soldier. The Assyrians crafted these stories carefully. They carved them into reliefs on palace walls. They inscribed them into stone tablets. They sent messages ahead of their armies, declaring what had been done to those who resisted. Every detail meant to frighten, to soften resistance before a single arrow flew. And when they conquered, the spectacle of cruelty was not hidden. It was displayed. Captives impaled on stakes outside city gates. Heads piled into pyramids as warnings. Prisoners marched naked through streets, chained together, humiliated before cheering crowds. Kings stripped of their crowns, kneeling, bound, placed beneath the feet of Assyrian rulers. The message was unmistakable: resist, and this will be your fate. Close your eyes again. And imagine being a child in a city awaiting Assyria's approach. You have never seen them, but you have heard. Your father whispers to your mother at night, their voices trembling. Neighbors debate whether to fight or to surrender before the rams arrive. Even before the first arrow flies, despair already seeps into the walls. This was not random cruelty. It was policy. Assyria used terror as deliberately as they used swords. They knew that an enemy who feared them might surrender quickly. That a kingdom which once resisted would never dare again. That the memory of cruelty could last longer than the memory of mercy. But cruelty alone was not enough. It had to be shown, repeated, carved, paraded. The Assyrians turned brutality into theater. In their reliefs, kings are shown grasping the beards of captive rulers, forcing them to kneel. Archers pierce enemies with arrows, their bodies tumbling from walls. Flames engulf cities, while Assyrian soldiers march forward in perfect calm. The contrast is striking. The victors serene, the defeated writhing. Even in art, fear was sharpened. To the Assyrians, cruelty was not shameful. It was sacred. They declared themselves instruments of their god Ashur. Their violence justified as divine judgment upon the wicked. And when cruelty becomes holy, it also becomes limitless. Yet there was balance in this terror. It was not always destruction. For those who surrendered quickly, tribute was taken, lives spared, cities left standing. This, too, was part of the strategy. Fear of cruelty pushed enemies toward surrender. And the promise of mercy, when obedience was swift, ensured the empire could still profit. Terror punished, mercy rewarded. Both tools in the same hand. Close your eyes once more. Imagine standing upon a city wall, watching the dust cloud of Assyria's army rising on the horizon. You know their rams can break your gates. Their towers can climb your walls. But it is not the machines that make your heart tremble. It is the stories, the whispers, the memory of what they have done before. The battle is lost before it begins. This was psychological warfare. The shaping of minds, not only the breaking of walls. The Assyrians did not only conquer with iron, they conquered with fear. And in this, they were masters. For terror outlives armies. And long after cities fell silent, long after walls crumbled, their stories still whispered across deserts and rivers. Empires do not rise by armies alone. They rise by the hands, the voices, the wills of their kings. And in Assyria, kings were not only rulers, they were conquerors, priests, symbols of war made flesh. Close your eyes and imagine a throne room in Nineveh. The walls lined with carved stone reliefs, showing armies marching, enemies kneeling. At the center sits the king, crown heavy with gold, robes embroidered with lions and winged bulls. In one hand a bow, in the other a cup of wine. Around him, scribes, priests, generals, all waiting for his word. For the king's word was not only law, it was destiny. The titles tell us everything. King of the universe, King of the 4 quarters of the world, chosen of Asher. These were not modest men. They claimed dominion not only over their lands, but over creation itself. Tiglath-Pileser III. His reign reshaped the very bones of the empire. He reorganized the army, expanding it into a professional, permanent machine. He stretched Assyria's reach deep into lands it had never held before. Every conquest recorded on clay tablets, each victory proclaimed with ruthless pride. He was the architect of empire, the one who took a kingdom of strong kings and turned it into a machine of endless expansion. Then Sennacherib, the king who made Nineveh a wonder of the world. He raised new palaces, vast and glittering, their walls carved with his triumphs. He built aqueducts, canals, gardens, making the city itself a symbol of Assyria's might. But he was also remembered for destruction. It was Sennacherib who marched against Babylon, a city older and proud, and crushed it without mercy. He flooded its streets, toppled its temples, burned its walls. The city erased, its memory scarred. He was not only a builder, he was an annihilator. And then Ashurbanipal, the warrior scholar. On the battlefield, he was as fierce as his fathers. But in the palace, he gathered knowledge. Clay tablets, writings, histories, collected into what we now call the Library of Ashurbanipal. Within those tablets were epics like Gilgamesh, wisdom of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon. He conquered with sword and with pen. His reign was both the height of Assyria's glory and the foreshadowing of its decline. For even as he gathered knowledge, enemies gathered strength. These kings were not gentle. They were not rulers who sought peace, or compromise, or balance. They were kings of war. Their legitimacy rested not in kindness, but in conquest. If they stopped marching, if they stopped winning, their thrones would crumble. So they marched endlessly. Close your eyes again. Imagine their inscriptions. Words carved into stone for all to see. I destroyed their cities. I carried off their treasures. I cut down their people like reeds. Such words may sound cruel to us, but to Assyrians, they were glory. Proof their king was strong, their empire eternal. The kings embodied Assyria's culture of war. They were the living parades, the human reliefs, the voices that proclaimed, "We are invincible. We are chosen. We are eternal." And yet, behind the glory, there was fragility. For kings who failed in war lost everything: their power, their titles, their lives. To rule Assyria was to stand always on the edge of the sword. The kings of Assyria were men, but they performed godhood, and that performance sustained the empire. For when people saw their king, they did not only see a man, they saw Assyria itself. Every empire needs a heart, a place where its strength can be seen, where its rulers can dwell, where its people can be reminded of what they serve. For Assyria, that heart was not one city alone. It was many, each rising in time, each more ambitious than the last. Close your eyes and picture Ashur, the first capital, the city from which the empire took its name. It rose upon the western bank of the Tigris, modest at first, its walls built of mud brick, its temples small but steady. Yet even here, the foundations of empire were laid. The temple of Ashur, their patron god, stood as the center. Every king swore loyalty before its altar, every victory dedicated to its deity. Ashur was not just a city. It was a covenant. A promise that this people, this army, this kingdom would march forever under the eye of their god. But empires grow, and with them, their capitals must grow too. Close your eyes again. Now see Nimrod, once called Kalhu. When Ashurnasirpal II chose it as his capital, he did not build humbly. He built vast palaces, rising high with carved stone reliefs stretching wall to wall. Scenes of soldiers, captives, lions hunted, battles won. Every visitor who stepped through its gates walked through a gallery of power. Even the floors glimmered with stone inscriptions, words pressed beneath the very feet of those who entered. The city became a living performance. Every wall speaking the same message: Assyria is eternal, Assyria is supreme. And yet, Nimrod was not only palace. It was spectacle. Great courtyards stretched wide, filled with soldiers, priests, emissaries. Foreign envoys walked those halls, forced to look upon the endless carvings of Assyrian victories. There was no escape from the message. Every corner whispered, every stone shouted, "Bow before the King of the universe." But greater still was Nineveh. Sennacherib made it the jewel of Assyria. He raised palaces so vast they dwarfed all others. He lined them with endless stone panels, hundreds of feet long, carved with images of campaigns, hunts, and rituals. To walk in Nineveh was to drown in victory. Even the gardens there, watered by canals and aqueducts, were said to astonish. Some whisper that they may have inspired tales of the hanging gardens of Babylon. Nineveh was not only a capital. It was a declaration. A city meant to tell the world, this is the center of power. This is the heart of civilization. Close your eyes once more. Imagine walking its streets. merchants selling goods from every conquered land. Spices, ivory, gold. Soldiers in polished armor, their swords gleaming in the sun. Priests moving in procession, their chants echoing off stone. Scribes with clay tablets pressed against their chests, recording every tribute paid, every decree issued. The air itself heavy with authority. And within the palaces, the king's throne room. Columns rising high, carved with spirals of power. Winged bulls with human faces guarding the doors, their gaze unblinking. Walls alive with images. Lions pierced by arrows, enemies begging for mercy, armies marching forever onward. To stand there was to be surrounded, consumed, overwhelmed. It was theater. The city itself became a stage. Every brick, every relief, every garden, every gate performed power. But it was not only for enemies, not only for visitors. It was for Assyrians themselves. Citizens walking those streets, seeing the reliefs, breathing the incense, hearing the proclamations. They too were reminded. Daily, hourly, that their empire was unshakable, that their kings were chosen, that their destiny was conquest. These capitals, Ashur, Nimrud, Nineveh, were more than homes. They were weapons. Weapons of awe, of intimidation, of pride. Just as siege towers broke walls, these cities broke resistance without a sword drawn. For to stand within them was to believe in Assyria. Or at least, to know resistance was futile. And as the empire grew, so too did the stage of its capitals. Palaces rebuilt larger, halls lined with even more stone, inscriptions pressed deeper. Each city a mirror of the king who raised it. Each capital a new heartbeat of the same great body. This was how Assyria showed its might not only in war, but in stone, in city, in stage. Power is not only measured in battles won. It is measured in how long control can last once the swords are sheathed. The Assyrians knew this. They understood that conquering a city was only the beginning. Holding it, bending it to their will, weaving it into their empire. This was the true challenge. Close your eyes and picture the fall of a city. The gates broken, the walls collapsed. Smoke rises from rooftops. Cries echo in the streets. The soldiers gather captives, men, women, children. The survivors are not killed. Instead, they are led away. Long columns stretch across the plains. Lines of people, chained or bound with rope, carrying what little they can. Children stumble, elders lean upon sticks. Guards march alongside, driving them forward. Behind them, their city smolders. Ahead of them, a new land awaits. This was deportation. Not random, not chaotic, but organized, deliberate, systematic. The Assyrians uprooted entire populations from their homes. Tens of thousands at a time. sometimes more. Families separated, villages emptied, tribes dismantled. And then, they were resettled in distant corners of the empire. Why? Because rebellion thrives in familiar soil. A people rooted in their homeland, surrounded by their kin, can rise again. But a people scattered, placed among strangers, cut off from sacred sites and ancestral graves, are weaker, quieter, easier to control. Close your eyes again. Imagine a farmer from the Levant, torn from his vineyard, forced to walk hundreds of miles east to Mesopotamia. There, he is given new land, new neighbors, perhaps even a new language. He plants again, he tills again. But his past is gone. The ties that bound him to rebellion are severed. He has no city walls to defend, no kin to rally. Only survival in a strange place. The Assyrians did not only remove people, they replaced them. Those deported from one land were resettled in another conquered land. Cultures mixed, languages collided. A deliberate confusion of identity, so that no one region remained too strong, too united, too dangerous. And still, the system had another edge. Deportees brought their skills with them. Weavers, smiths, potters, builders. Placed in new cities, they enriched Assyria's heartlands, strengthened its economy, beautified its palaces. The empire took not only land, but talent. Every conquered people became another resource. Close your eyes once more. Picture Nineveh. Within its markets, you hear many tongues. Aramaic, Akkadian, Hebrew, Elamite. Merchants from distant lands forced to settle here now sell their wares. Artisans carve ivory in styles from far-off coasts. The city itself becomes a patchwork of cultures. But beneath the diversity, one truth remains. All serve Assyria. The policy of deportation was harsh. Families torn apart. Identities erased. Traditions uprooted. But it was effective. For centuries, the empire held vast territories, stitched together not only by iron and fear, but by this scattering of peoples. Every movement of population another thread, weaving conquered lands into the fabric of Assyria. The Bible remembers this cruelty. The northern kingdom of Israel, conquered by Assyria, its people led away into exile. Whole tribes vanished from history, remembered as the lost tribes. This was the scale of Assyrian power. Not just battles, not just cities burned, but whole peoples removed, scattered like dust in the wind. It was control by dispersal. A silent conquest, continuing long after the rams fell silent. For a sword can win a city, but a policy can hold it forever. And so, Assyria did not only conquer, it reshaped the world. One captive caravan at a time. An empire does not live on soldiers alone. Armies may conquer, kings may boast, but without wealth, without the steady flow of food, silver, gold, and goods, the empire withers. The Assyrians knew this well. And so, from every conquest, from every defeated city, from every kingdom bent to their will, they demanded tribute. Close your eyes and imagine the scene in Nineveh after a victory. Caravans stretch into the city, guarded by Assyrian soldiers. Carts creak beneath the weight of treasures. Men strain to carry heavy vessels of bronze and silver. Donkeys stumble beneath sacks of grain, jars of oil, baskets of fruit. Foreign kings walk behind, their faces downcast, bearing gifts they offer not with joy, but with trembling hands. Tribute was more than payment. It was ritual, a public reminder of dominance. The defeated did not simply send goods in silence. They delivered them in procession, so that all of Assyria could see their submission. Gold and silver gleamed in heaps before the throne. Exotic woods from distant lands stacked in piles. Ivory tusks, precious stones, incense from Arabia, wine from vineyards far away. Animals too. Camels, horses, lions, leopards, even elephants. Creatures paraded through Nineveh's streets to astonish the people and glorify the king. Close your eyes again. Picture the throne room, filled with treasures. The king sits, unmoving, his face stern. Before him kneel emissaries of conquered lands. Their robes torn, their heads bowed. Behind them, scribes scratch upon clay tablets, recording every item given. Every coin, every measure of grain, every jewel. All catalogued, so none could be forgotten. But tribute was more than wealth. It was also obedience. A promise that the defeated would remain loyal. For as long as tribute was paid, the army would not march again. Fail to pay, and the soldiers would return, iron swords in hand, rams and towers at the ready. The system was relentless. From the smallest village to the greatest kingdom, all were woven into it. Some paid with livestock, others with metals, others with slaves. Each region gave what it had. Each gift a piece of its identity stripped away and absorbed into the empire. And the wealth of tribute fueled everything. It built palaces, raised temples, fed armies. It filled markets with goods from every corner of the known world. Nineveh and Nimrud became centers not only of war, but of trade and display. The empire's strength glittered not only in armor, but in gold and silk and jewels. Close your eyes once more. Imagine being an ordinary Assyrian walking the streets of Nineveh on the day tribute arrived. You see carts piled with treasures you have never imagined. A leopard snarling in chains. Camels swaying under loads of spice. Golden vessels gleaming in the sun. You hear whispers of far-off lands you will never visit. Yet their wealth now lies before your eyes. It fills you with awe, pride, even fear. Your empire is vast. Your king unstoppable. And for the king, tribute was theatre. Every pile of gold another declaration of his might. Every exotic beast another symbol of his reach. The tribute ceremony was not hidden in storerooms. It was staged in courtyards, carved into stone reliefs, inscribed on tablets. Visitors saw it. Citizens saw it. Enemies heard of it. Wealth itself became a weapon, a spectacle, a message. The empire thrived on this system. Armies marched outward, victories brought inward. Tribute flowed like rivers, feeding the heart of Assyria. And with every caravan of treasure, the empire grew stronger. But it was not only wealth that filled Assyria. It was people too. Soldiers, scribes, artisans, farmers. Everyday lives woven into the vast machinery of empire. And so we turn from treasure and tribute to the lives of ordinary Assyrians, who carried the weight of empire upon their shoulders. An empire shines in parades, in palaces, in armies, in victories carved upon stone. But beneath those shining surfaces lived countless ordinary people. The farmers who sowed the grain, the craftsmen who shaped the tools, the soldiers who bled in the dust. The empire was built not only by kings, but by them. Close your eyes and imagine a small village in the Assyrian heartland. Fields stretch out toward the horizon, green in the spring, golden in the harvest. Mud brick houses cluster together, their flat roofs holding jars of grain. Children chase each other through dusty courtyards, their laughter ringing against the walls. A mother kneels beside an oven, baking bread flat against the stone, the smell of smoke and grain rising into the air. A father bends to his plow, oxen straining, the soil turning in dark furrows. These were the lives that fed the empire. For every soldier needed food. Every army needed supply. The harvest of one farmer, the weaving of one woman, the pottery of one craftsman. All traveled into the vast machine of Assyria's conquests. Ordinary people, often unseen, sustained the extraordinary might of their empire. But life was not easy. Taxes pressed heavily. Farmers owed grain to the state, animals for the army, labor for great building projects. At harvest, officials came with scribes and guards, measuring fields, counting sheaves, pressing seals into clay tablets. Every measure recorded, every bushel claimed. The weight of empire was written not only in victories, but in burdens carried upon the backs of its people. Close your eyes again. Picture a craftsman in Nineveh. He sits cross-legged on the floor of a dim workshop, carving ivory into delicate shapes. Perhaps a lion, perhaps a lotus flower. Designs drawn from both Assyrian style and foreign lands. His work will decorate a king's palace, or a noble's chair, or a temple's offering. He is not remembered in carvings or inscriptions. Yet his hands leave marks that endure across centuries. And think of the soldiers. For many young men were drawn into the army. Some willingly, proud to fight beneath the banners of Ashur. Others pressed into service, their families left behind to tend the land alone. A soldier's life was harsh. Long marches, little rest, endless campaigns across desert and mountain. He might not return for years, or at all. And yet, to his family, his absence was part of duty, part of life. For women too, life carried weight. They tended homes, raised children, spun wool, baked bread. But they were also guardians of survival. When men marched away, they held the household together. And some women, particularly noble women, carried influence, managing estates, supporting temples, even recording prayers to the gods. Children grew up in the shadow of war. They played with wooden swords, imitated the parades they saw, shouted the names of kings in their games. For even in childhood, the culture of Assyria seeped into their bones. To grow was to learn loyalty, to honor the gods, to fear the army's discipline. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the festivals of the people. Crowds gathering, music echoing, food shared in courtyards. At times, even the burden of empire softened, replaced by laughter, song, the joy of survival. For even under the weight of kings and armies, ordinary Assyrians still lived, loved, celebrated. Life was harsh, but it was life. And though they are not carved in stone reliefs, though their names do not fill inscriptions, these people were the true foundation of the empire. Without their labor, without their grain, without their craft, Assyria would have crumbled. They bore the weight in silence. They endured the burdens, so the kings could claim their titles. The everyday Assyrians remind us of a truth that echoes across all empires. That power may shine from the top, but it is always held up from below. An empire that thrives on conquest must always face rivals, for power is never held in silence. It is always tested, always challenged. Assyria, mighty as it was, stood among neighbors who envied it, feared it, hated it. And so its history was written not only in parades and palaces, but in the endless clash with those who dared resist. Close your eyes, and let us drift first to Babylon. Ancient Babylon, older than Assyria itself, with its proud temples and towering ziggurats. Babylon was no mere neighbor. It was a rival civilization, rich in culture, strong in memory, beloved by gods long worshipped. And yet again and again, Assyria marched south. Armies stormed its gates. Kings toppled. Treasures seized. Sennacherib went further still. When Babylon rebelled too often, he crushed it with merciless fury. He tore down its walls, flooded its canals, burned its temples. The great city erased in fire and flood. But Babylon's spirit never died. It rose again, rebuilt again, rebelled again. Like a flame that could not be extinguished, it remained Assyria's eternal thorn. Now drift east, across mountains, into Elam, a land of warriors, fierce and proud, who dared to challenge Assyria's might. For centuries, the two powers clashed. Raids across rivers, battles fought in valleys. But in the end, Assyria's armies came in force. Elamite cities burned, their kings slain, their statues dragged away. Even the bones of their dead kings were unearthed and scattered. Assyria not only defeated Elam, it sought to erase it from memory. Now close your eyes again, and hear the faint echoes of Israel, the small kingdom in the west, clinging to its faith, resisting foreign rule. The Assyrian armies came, siege towers raised against Samaria. The city fell, its people led away in chains. The Bible remembers them as the lost tribes, vanished into the vastness of Assyrian deportations. For to Assyria, no kingdom was too small, no city too sacred, no people beyond its reach. And still, Assyria's hunger drove it further, southward, beyond deserts, into the land of Egypt. The Nile, ancient and proud, cradle of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Even Egypt felt the weight of Assyria's iron. Armies marched across Sinai, chariots rattling against the sands. Cities fell, rulers humbled. Assyria reached the Nile itself, planting its banners where even older empires had stood. It was a moment of triumph, a declaration that no land, no river, no kingdom was beyond their grasp. Close your eyes once more. Picture the map of the ancient Near East. Every corner touched by Assyria's reach. To the west, the Levant bent beneath tribute. To the east, Elam crushed and scattered. To the south, Babylon burned and rebuilt. To the farthest edge, Egypt invaded. No empire before had stretched so far, struck so deep, claimed so much. But this endless struggle carried a cost. For every rival crushed was a rival waiting to rise again. Babylon's spirit endured. Elam returned in whispers. Egypt resisted in cycles. Assyria fought, conquered, destroyed. But each victory demanded soldiers, supplies, wealth. And with each new rival, the empire stretched itself thinner. Still, in its prime, Assyria was unmatched. Its kings wore crowns of victory. Its soldiers marched across continents. It outmuscled every rival, bent every knee, shook every throne. For a time, it seemed invincible. But even as they triumphed, even as they carved their power into stone, the seeds of fragility grew. For no empire can fight forever, not even one that lives by the sword. History drifts like a tide, and when we look closely, we see patterns. What was once carved in stone reliefs, what was once marched through dusty gates, now reappears on wide boulevards lined with cameras. Close your eyes and hold in your mind the image of Assyria's parades. soldiers in ordered ranks, banners lifted high, captives paraded in chains, chariots rolling forward, the king at the center, incense rising like smoke to the heavens. Every movement a performance, every display a declaration. Assyria is strong, Assyria is eternal. Now open your mind to the modern world. The wide streets of Beijing, rows upon rows of soldiers in perfect symmetry, boots striking pavement as one, missiles gliding on carriers, tanks polished until they gleam, jets soaring overhead, their trails painted in colors. And at the center, Xi Jinping, composed and still, surveying it all. The message, too, is unmistakable. China is strong, China endures. The echo is undeniable. Separated by thousands of years, yet bound by the same instinct. For every empire, ancient or modern, knows this truth. Power must be seen. It must be staged, rehearsed, ritualized. It is not enough to win battles, not enough to hold land. The people must believe, the allies must notice, the enemies must tremble. Assyria paraded its captives. China invites its allies. Different rituals, same intention. When she sits beside Vladimir Putin, beside Kim Jong-un, their presence itself is theater. A gesture carved not in stone, but broadcast in light. It says, "We are not alone. We are many. We are unshakable." It is alliance made visible, muscle shown not only in weapons, but in the company kept. Assyria once paraded bound kings beneath its throne. Modern China seats powerful rulers at its side. Two forms of theater, both meant to remind the world of hierarchy. Close your eyes again. Think of Assyrian reliefs. The king grasping the beard of a kneeling ruler, the defeated forced to bow. Now think of cameras flashing upon the reviewing stand in Beijing. Foreign leaders seated as honored guests. The setting is different, the costumes new. But the ritual is ancient. It is about who watches, who kneels, who sits, who stands. And for the people, too, the purpose is the same. In Assyria, the farmer in his village saw the captives paraded, the treasures displayed, the reliefs carved. And he believed, "My king is mighty, my empire unshakable." In China today, the citizen sees the rows of soldiers, the glitter of machines, the jets soaring, and believes, "My nation is vast, my state is strong." Both ceremonies bind the people in awe, in pride, in submission, power as performance. It is as old as the first drumbeat of war, as new as the latest missile unveiled. And yet, behind both lies the same fragility. For Assyria displayed its might endlessly. And still, it fell. The parades could not save Nineveh. The carvings could not hold back Babylon. The spectacle, however grand, was still only performance. So too, in the modern world, parades are not shields. They inspire, they warn, they impress. But they do not guarantee endurance. Every empire that parades today must know that Assyria once did the same. And Assyria is dust. Close your eyes once more. Let the echoes blend together. Chariots rolling on dirt roads. Tanks rumbling on city boulevards. Captives kneeling in chains. Leaders seated in suits. Different images. The same story. That empires show their power to the world. But the showing is not the same as the keeping. This is the echo of Assyria, alive in the modern rituals of China, and in every empire that believes strength must be seen. Empires shine, but every shine carries shadow. Every triumph carries cost. And even as Assyria marched outward, even as its kings paraded victories, even as its armies thundered across deserts and mountains, within, the cracks began to grow. Close your eyes and imagine an army returning from campaign. Thousands of soldiers, weary, scarred, their sandals worn, their armor dented. Behind them march lines of captives, herds of animals, carts of treasure. The people cheer. The scribes record. The king boasts. But beneath the celebration, there is exhaustion. Fields untended while farmers march. Families strained. Harvests left vulnerable. The empire feeds itself on war. But war also drains it. Assyria's very strength was also its weakness. Its army was vast, professional, always ready. But that meant it was always hungry. It needed constant tribute, constant conquest, constant streams of silver and grain to survive. The empire could not stand still. It had to keep moving, keep seizing, keep expanding. Like a fire that dies if it is not fed. Close your eyes again. Picture the map of Assyria at its height. The heartland along the Tigris and Euphrates. But beyond it, territories stretching far, mountains to the north, deserts to the west, coasts of the Mediterranean, even the Nile. Each new conquest a jewel, but also a burden. More lands to govern. More roads to patrol. More garrisons to feed. Every expansion stretched the sinews thinner. And while the center glittered, the edges frayed. Rebellions were constant. Babylon rising again and again. Elam pushing back from the east. Egypt restless beneath Assyrian governors. Even smaller states tested the empire whenever its attention drifted. Assyria crushed them, yes. Again and again. But every suppression drained men, treasure, time. And every victory was only temporary. The conquered never truly forgot, never truly forgave. And within Assyria itself, the strain grew. Taxes heavy. Farmers pressed for grain, craftsmen pressed for labor. Deportations shifted populations, but also bred resentment. Ordinary people carried the weight of empire upon their shoulders, and though they endured, cracks spread quietly. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the palace at Nineveh. Its halls glittering with gold, its walls carved with endless victories. But behind those walls, officials whisper, "How much longer can we hold so many lands? How many more soldiers can we levy? What happens if tribute fails?" Even as kings proclaimed eternity, their scribes, their generals, their ministers must have known the truth. That eternity is fragile. And so, Assyria lived in a paradox. Its power looked unstoppable, its armies unmatched. But it was stretched, strained, fragile. The stronger it grew, the more brittle it became. This is the hidden truth of empire. That greatness is not only in what is seen, it is also in what is unseen. The weight upon the people, the exhaustion of soldiers, the constant need for tribute and victory. And when that weight grows too heavy, even the mightiest begin to falter. Assyria's fragility was the shadow of its strength. The cracks deepened, and soon, those cracks would widen into collapse. Every empire believes itself eternal. Assyria, perhaps more than any, declared it in stone, carved it in reliefs, inscribed it on tablets. King of the universe, king of the four quarters of the world. Such words sounded eternal. But eternity, in this world, is always fragile. Close your eyes and imagine Nineveh at its height. Walls towering so high that they seem to scrape the sky. Palaces vast, their walls lined with carved lions and endless victories. Gardens watered by canals, flowing with fruit and flowers. Markets overflowing with goods from across the known world. It seemed unshakable. But beneath the glitter, the cracks grew. Babylon, crushed again and again, remembered its pain. The Medes, fierce tribes from the mountains of the east, hungered for revenge. Other kingdoms, tired of tribute, tired of chains, waited for their chance. And then, like rivers meeting, their forces flowed together. A coalition rose, united not by love, but by shared hatred of Assyria. Close your eyes again. Picture the year 612 BCE. Armies gathering like storms. Babylonian banners snapping in the wind. Median warriors marching with spears and axes. Their numbers swelling as allies joined. A tide of men, weapons, and fury rolling toward Assyria. Nineveh stood in their path. The jewel of the empire, the proudest of capitals. Its walls stretched miles, thick and tall, thought to be impenetrable. Inside, treasures glimmered, soldiers sharpened their swords, priests prayed to Ashur. The king, Sin-sharish-kun, trusted in the city's might. For how could Nineveh fall? But the tide came closer. The coalition laid siege. Battering rams thundered at the gates. Ladders clattered against walls. Siege towers rolled forward. Arrows rained, Fires spread, the ground shook with the pounding of war. Still the city held. Days turned to weeks. Weeks into months. The people within grew weary. Food grew scarce. Hope thinned. And then the river turned. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the Kosar River flowing through Nineveh. The coalition breached its channels, diverted its flow. The waters surged against the city's walls. Foundations weakened. Mud bricks softened. And suddenly, what iron could not break, water destroyed. A section of wall collapsed. And through the breach, the armies poured. The fall was swift. Houses burned. Palaces looted. Temples toppled. The great library of Ashurbanipal, filled with clay tablets of ancient knowledge, was buried in fire and ruin. The king vanished in the chaos, his fate uncertain. The city that had once called itself eternal crumbled into ash. Close your eyes again. Picture the silence after. The streets once filled with merchants and soldiers now strewn with bodies. The walls, once towering, broken and blackened. The palaces, once carved with endless victories, their stones cracked, their reliefs shattered. Nineveh, the heart of the world, became a ruin. The world gasped. For who had believed it possible? The empire that had ruled with iron for centuries, that had crushed Babylon, Elam, Israel, even reached Egypt, was gone in a matter of years. The Assyrian heartland burned, its cities erased, its people scattered. The empire that once declared itself eternal vanished almost overnight. And yet, it was not entirely gone. For memory endures. The fear it inspired lingered in stories. The cruelty it wielded echoed in scriptures. The lessons it left remained for every empire that came after. The fall of Assyria reminds us that no wall is too high, no army too vast, no king too powerful to escape time. Every empire carries within it the seeds of its end. And when the winds rise, when the rivers turn, when enemies gather, eternity collapses into dust. Nineveh fell. Assyria fell. And the world moved on. The smoke of Nineveh fades. The cries of battle drift into silence. The walls are broken, the palaces looted, the kings gone. Assyria, once invincible, is no more. And yet, its story is not truly lost. For in its rise, in its cruelty, in its brilliance, in its collapse, lies a lesson. A lesson whispered not only to its neighbors long ago, but to every power that came after, and to us, even now. Close your eyes. Think of Assyria at its height. Armies vast, professional, disciplined. Iron weapons gleaming in the sun. Siege towers rolling forward. cities crumbling like sand before them. Tribute flowing in heaps. Gold and silver, ivory and jewels, animals from distant lands. Kings seated upon thrones, declaring themselves king of the universe. It seemed eternal, unshakable, beyond challenge. But eternity proved fragile. The same victories that fed its pride fed also its exhaustion. The same armies that built its glory drained its strength. The same terror that silenced enemies bred hatred, rebellion, and revenge. The very tools that made Assyria great ensured it could not last. The first lesson, then, is this: power built only on fear cannot endure. For fear weakens, but it also festers. It breeds silence in the moment, but rebellion in the heart. And when the chance comes, those who once trembled will rise together. As Babylon and the Medes rose, and the empire that ruled with cruelty will fall with cruelty returned. The second lesson is hunger. Assyria's armies needed conquest to live. Without tribute, without plunder, without new lands feeding them, the empire starved. It could not pause. It could not rest. Like a fire, it had to consume. And in consuming, it burned itself out. The truth whispers softly: power that must expand forever will always collapse. The third lesson is fragility beneath spectacle. Assyria's kings carved their victories into stone, paraded captives, declared eternity. But the glitter of Nineveh, the reliefs upon its walls, the treasures in its markets, could not protect it when the walls broke. No matter how strong the display, the foundation was still human. And human strength always falters. Close your eyes again. Now think of modern powers. Nations parading their armies, missiles gleaming, jets soaring. Leaders inviting allies to stand beside them, showing unity to the world. The rituals are new, but the instinct is old. The need to be seen as eternal, unshakable. Yet Assyria whispers, even the strongest fall. Even the loudest silence fades. The fourth lesson is memory. For though Assyria is gone, its story endured. The Bible remembered its cruelty. Historians studied its conquests. Archaeologists unearthed its palaces, its reliefs, its tablets. Its power did not survive. But its warning did. And that warning speaks across time. No empire escapes time. Close your eyes once more. Imagine a farmer in Nineveh, long ago, watching a parade of captives and treasures after a victory. He believes his empire eternal. He believes his king unstoppable. But only decades later, his children walk among ruins. This is the quiet lesson of Assyria. That what seems eternal in one lifetime may crumble in the next. And so, what do we learn? That power is always fleeting. That cruelty carries its own destruction. That expansion without rest becomes exhaustion. That spectacle hides fragility. That no empire, no matter how vast, escapes the hands of time. Assyria's story is not just ancient history. It is mirror, reflection, warning. For Rome, for Britain, for the Soviets, for America, for China, for every state that parades its strength before the world. The whisper remains, remember Nineveh. Remember Assyria. Remember that eternity is never eternal. And so the lesson drifts softly, like smoke over ruins. That power may dazzle. It may terrify. It may endure for centuries. But it will always fade. Assyria fell. And in its fall, it left us wisdom. A wisdom best heard in the quiet of night. When the world grows still. And the echoes of ancient parades remind us of how fragile power truly is. The walls of Nineveh are silent now. The palaces of Nimrud are dust. The throne of Ashurbanipal is empty. But though the empire itself is gone, its shadow still lingers. For power does not vanish when an empire falls. It leaves marks. It leaves echoes. And Assyria's echoes were louder than most. Close your eyes. And follow the centuries that came after. First came the Persians. The great Achaemenid Empire, rising from the east, stretching wider than even Assyria had dreamed. Its kings, Cyrus and Darius, ruled lands from the Indus to the Aegean. And though they were gentler in rule, they remembered the Assyrian ways. They built roads to move armies swiftly. They demanded tribute from conquered lands. They used spectacle to remind subjects of their power. In their palaces at Persepolis, reliefs of processions lined the walls. Not unlike the carvings of Assyria, though softer, more orderly. An echo, reshaped. Then came Greece, and then Rome. Rome especially, vast and disciplined. Its triumphal parades through the streets of the city were living echoes of Assyria's captives dragged through Nineveh. Roman generals marched with prisoners in chains, treasures piled high, exotic animals paraded. The people watched, cheered, and learned the same lesson the Assyrians once taught, that power must be seen, not only felt. Even Rome's punishments, its crucifixions, its burning of rebellious cities, carried the same logic as Assyria's impalements and destruction. Fear as a tool. Spectacle as policy. Close your eyes again. Move forward in time. The Middle Ages. Kings of Europe, crowned with the claim of divine right. They, too, paraded victories, built castles as symbols, displayed their power in stone and ceremony. When monarchs rode through cities, when banners were raised, when drums thundered in coronations, they were unknowingly echoing the Assyrian stage. Different costumes. The same performance. And then the modern age. Nations rose, armies drilled, parades became rituals of state. Napoleon marching through Paris, Hitler filling squares with banners and torches, the Soviets rolling missiles through Red Square. Each one, knowingly or not, carrying forward Assyria's lesson, that power must perform itself, or else it fades. And now, in our own century, the echoes remain. China's parades of steel and missile, America's flyovers at inaugurations, its fleets displayed upon oceans, Russia's tanks grinding across Red Square, North Korea's soldiers saluting in endless ranks. Every image broadcast in light, across screens, to every corner of the globe, as once they were carved in stone upon Assyrian walls. Close your eyes once more. Imagine standing before a relief in Nineveh, carved nearly 3,000 years ago. You see soldiers marching in ranks, captives kneeling, treasures carried in heaps. Now imagine standing before a television, watching a modern parade. Rows of soldiers marching in step, missiles gleaming, leaders watching from thrones of power. Two images, separated by time, but they are mirrors. For power always repeats itself. Assyria's empire is gone, but its methods live on. In Persia, in Rome, in the empires of Europe, in the nations of today. The tools may change. Bronze becomes iron. Iron becomes steel. Chariots become tanks. Reliefs become screens. But the instinct is the same. To show power. To frighten enemies. To inspire allies. To remind subjects that they are ruled by something greater than themselves. The echoes of Assyria ripple forward endlessly. And they remind us that no empire is entirely lost. For even in ruin, it leaves its voice behind. And every parade, every monument, every spectacle of power we see today is in some way an echo of Nineveh. The story has carried us far. From the wide boulevards of Beijing, tanks rolling, missiles gleaming, allies seated in silence, back through the dusty gates of Nineveh, chariots rattling, captives paraded, kings crowned as gods. We have walked with armies, stood in palaces, trembled at sieges. And now, as the night grows still, the echoes begin to fade. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Let the story soften. Let it drift. Assyria rose with iron and fire. It built armies unlike any before. It crushed Babylon, shattered Elam, scattered Israel, even touched the Nile. It paraded its strength in stone reliefs, in captives dragged through streets, in treasures piled before its kings. And for a time, it seemed unshakable. Eternal. But eternity proved fragile. The fire that needed constant fuel burned itself out. The fear that silenced enemies also bred hatred and revenge. And when Babylon and the Medes rose together, when the river itself turned against Nineveh, the walls fell. The empire that called itself eternal vanished in fire and ruin. Yet memory endures. The carvings buried in earth, the tablets preserved in clay, the whispers carried into scripture. And even today, in the rituals of modern states, in parades of steel and soldiers, in the theater of power, we see Assyria's echo. We see the old truth repeated: power must perform itself. But the deeper truth, the quieter truth, is this: that performance cannot protect forever. That even the loudest army falls silent. That every empire carries its end within it, as surely as every fire carries its own ashes. Close your eyes again. Picture the ruins of Nineveh under the moonlight. The broken walls quiet. The palaces collapsed into mounds of earth. Grass and flowers creeping where soldiers once marched. Children of another age playing where kings once sat in glory. The silence itself more powerful than the noise that came before. Now drift forward. Picture the parades of today. Soldiers marching in step. Missiles gleaming beneath cameras. Leaders sitting stern upon reviewing stands. These, too, are rituals of power. But they, too, will pass. The tanks will rust. The banners will fade. The crowds will scatter. And someday, those streets will carry other echoes. Assyria whispers still. It tells us that power dazzles, but fades. That conquest builds, but exhausts. That cruelty silences, but also seeds rebellion. That spectacle impresses, but cannot endure. And above all, that eternity belongs not to empires, but to time. Breathe slowly. Let these echoes drift. The kings are gone. The soldiers dust. The parades long ended. And now, the night is yours. Rest now. Rest as the story rests. As the ruins rest. As the echoes of Assyria settle back into silence. For tonight, you have walked through empire. You have seen the rise, the glory, the fall. And now, you may close your eyes, knowing that all power passes. And in that truth, there is peace. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. And let the ruins of Nineveh guard your dreams.